Our killer struck between courses, and dessert never came. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. This growing circle of sleuths amazes me. Tell me where you're watching from. I always look forward to your comments. Let's begin. It started, as many things do in Wolfe's life, with an interruption. That's not a metaphor. I mean it literally. At exactly 5:30, as I was trying to separate Fritz from a jar of imported anchovies he claimed had turned, and he claimed it in the kind of tone that means dinner might be ruined, the doorbell rang. It was early April, the weather couldn't decide what season it was, and neither could New York. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms for his sacred orchid hour. I, being the loyal and underappreciated assistant that I am, answered the door. The woman standing there wore a grey cloche hat that looked like it cost more than my last 3 suits combined. She had the kind of posture that told you she'd been taught to wait for servants to open things. But she also had a face that looked like it had spent more time in a professional kitchen than in society. I've seen enough tension on cheeks and burn scars on hands to know a chef when I see one. "Miss," I said, holding the door but not inviting her in. "We're friendly at the Brownstone, but not reckless. Miranda Vale," she said. "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent." "They all say that," I told her. "You have a reservation?" Her eyes flashed with annoyance, but she caught herself. "Tell him it's about Marcel Darnay. He'll want to hear it." Now, I didn't flinch. Don't make a habit of it. But I did straighten up a little. That name had passed through Wolfe's lips exactly twice in the time I'd known him, and both times it had been with the air of a man referencing someone who had offended the gods and gotten away with it. Marcel Darnay was a legend in the culinary world. A recluse, a genius, and by Wolfe's own admission, one of the only living people who ever bested him in a debate on veal, and she'd been dead for 5 years. "Wait here," I said, shutting the door before she could object. Wolfe was just emerging from the elevator, his face flushed from the tropical heat of the plant rooms. He frowned when I intercepted him. "Archie, I trust you have not allowed Fritz to destroy the There's a woman downstairs," I said. "Name's Miranda Vale. Says she needs to talk to you about Marcel Darnay." Wolfe stopped moving. That alone was enough to make me take a step back. He never stopped, he just was. Stationary as a principle. But this pause had hesitation in it. "Bring her in," he said at last. I went back, opened the door, and gestured her in. She took the invitation like she was used to bigger entrances. By the time we were all in the office, Wolfe in the big chair, me in mine, and Miss Vale on the red settee, Fritz had given up on the anchovies and started prepping something involving duck. The smells wafting in didn't seem to help Miranda Vale's composure. She twisted her gloves in her lap, and every now and then looked around the room like it was a cathedral she wasn't sure she believed in. "I appreciate you seeing me, Mr. Wolfe," she said. Her voice was steady now. "I'm head chef at Tableau in the West Village, 2 Michelin stars. Marcel Darnay was my mentor, my friend." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Was." "She's dead," I added helpfully. "Yes," she said. "And now someone's claiming she isn't." That got Wolfe's attention. Barely, but it was there, a slight deepening of the lines around his mouth. "They sent me something. A recipe in Marcel's hand last week." "A forgery," Wolfe said without hesitation. "I thought so too. Until yesterday." She reached into her handbag and pulled out an envelope. It was cream-colored, sealed with wax, no kidding, and bore an old-fashioned scrawl that looked like it belonged on a love letter or a death threat. She handed it to Wolfe, who didn't move. I got up and took it for him. Inside was a single page, a recipe for a sauce. One Wolfe had once tried to replicate from Marcel's private tasting menu in Provence, and failed. He took one look and muttered, "Damnation." That might not sound like much, but coming from Wolfe, it was the equivalent of a full Greek chorus. I take it that's real, I said. It is real, he replied, not looking up. Down to the misplaced comma in bay leaf ground. She was meticulous and wrong. Miranda leaned forward. There's more. My kitchen's been broken into, nothing stolen except a sealed jar of spice I never labeled. Only Marcel and I knew what it was. Someone's playing a game, and I'm the pawn. I think someone wants me to believe she's alive, or wants me to do something stupid trying to find out. Wolfe closed his eyes. Miss Vale, why come to me? You believe this is some culinary prank? No, I believe it's a warning, and if I'm right, someone's already dead. They just haven't been found yet. There was a silence. Then Wolfe sighed, the kind of slow exhale that meant he had decided something important. Archie, he said, opening his eyes, call Saul Panzer. Have him begin a quiet inquiry into Miss Darnay's death, and cancel tonight's dinner reservation. I blinked. We had a reservation? No, but we were going to. He looked at Miranda again, his eyes heavy and unreadable. For the moment, Miss Vale, I accept your case, though not for the reason you think, she nodded. And what reason is that? He shut his eyes again. You may have brought death into my kitchen. That is intolerable. You can always tell when Nero... Wolfe is irritated. It's not in his voice, that stays steady as a surgeon's hand, but in the way he chews his words like they're overcooked. That night, he let the duck go cold, which for him is like most men tossing a Rembrandt into the fireplace. Miranda Vale had left just after 6, looking lighter than when she arrived, but not by much. Wolfe had told her in that tone of finality, he keeps polished for clients. She would hear from us within 48 hours, and until then she was to keep her mouth, knives, and schedule tightly sealed. She left the envelope behind. Wolfe hadn't asked, she just knew better. By 7, Fritz had retired to his rooms, and I was parked in my office chair across from Wolfe, watching him reread the recipe like it held coordinates to the Holy Grail. I'd seen him study maps of Burgundy with less intensity. Hey, you're taking this personally, I said. He grunted. You've taken theft, betrayal, and blackmail like they were appetizers. But this, Wolfe interrupted, is not mere theft. It is corruption. The deliberate perversion of something rare, and once beautiful. That being the source, and that being Marcel, I leaned back. You never liked her. I respected her, he snapped. Which is more than I can say for most people with knives and television contracts. It wasn't news that Wolfe had a low opinion of most celebrity chefs, but Marcel Darnay had been in a class of her own. Her retirement, or vanishing act, 5 years ago had been the subject of as many gossip columns as gourmet reviews. Depending on who you asked, she'd either died in a boating accident off Corsica or gone to live in a silent monastery in Spain. No one really knew, and that was part of the allure. Now, apparently, someone wanted us to believe she was back, or at least wanted Miranda to think so. Saul says he'll get into it, I told Wolfe, dropping the receiver back on its cradle. He remembers the rumors. He said he'll start with Darnay's known associates, kitchen staff, and the cremation records. Cremation? Wolfe asked, eyes flicking up. Yeah, she was supposedly cremated after a private ceremony in Nice. No obituary, no guest list, just a 1-paragraph notice and a vanished body. Wolfe scowled. Sentimentality and secrecy, a potent pairing for nonsense. As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. I didn't move right away. It was 8:20 in the evening, and people who ring our doorbell at that hour generally fall into one of 3 categories: cops with bad timing, clients with worse luck, or trouble with a silk tie. I waited until Wolfe looked up. Go, I went. The man at the door looked like he sold rare wines or cheap lies. Late 40s, all cuffs and polish, hair too black to be real, smile too wide to trust. He held a lacquered box under one arm and wore the kind of cologne that turns honest dogs violent. Mr. Goodwin, he said, spotting me before I could say a word. I have a delivery for Mr. Wolfe, from Tableau. Now that set off a little bell. Not a fire alarm, more like one of those hotel desk chimes you hit when someone's ignoring you. "I'll take it," I said. "I was instructed to give it directly to Mr. Wolfe. It's perishable." "That's a fancy way of saying you want to walk into our house." He chuckled. "Not at all, but it contains a food item. It's important he sees the presentation." Now, I don't like men who use the word presentation outside of PowerPoints or art galleries. I especially don't like them when they wear imported shoes and try to outsmile me on my own doorstep. But Wolfe had asked for the next 48 hours to be observed carefully, and this, I figured, qualified. I let him in. Wolfe was already annoyed before the box hit his desk. That's the magic of cologne and charisma. Both act like vinegar in the brownstone air. The man introduced himself as Bastien Gray, sous chef, and director of public relations at Tableau. Wolfe didn't so much as nod. "Miranda sent this," Gray said. "She thought you should see it." He opened the box with theatrical flair. Inside was a small glass jar, no label, no markings, sealed, with wax. "The spice," I said. "The one Miranda said was stolen." Wolfe didn't speak. He gestured for Gray to set it down and leave. "I can explain," Gray said, clearly not used to being dismissed. "The recipe she received, it wasn't forged. It came from someone who knew Marcel better than she did. Someone who's been waiting for the right moment to share her final creation." "I am not interested in your marketing," Wolfe said icily. "Nor am I interested in your loyalty performance. Leave now." Gray stiffened. "You're making a mistake." "No," Wolfe said, eyes gleaming cold. "You are." Gray turned on his heel and left, but not without a parting shot. "You'll want to hear what the next delivery brings." When I returned, from locking the door, Wolfe hadn't moved. He was staring at the jar. "Archie, put that in the safe. The spice? Yes, do not open it. Do not sniff it. If Fritz asks, tell him it's poison." "Is it? I don't know. But it was tampered with, and someone wants us to believe it holds the essence of resurrection." I raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking this has nothing to do with Miranda?" "I think Miss Vale is being manipulated, and I think the players are just beginning to move." I slipped the jar into an envelope, sealed it, and walked it to the wall safe. When I turned back, Wolfe was staring at the envelope Miranda had left. Not the recipe, the envelope itself. A tiny slit had appeared near the flap. It hadn't been there before. Wolfe's voice was low, almost a murmur. "They searched it." "Who?" I asked. He looked up. "That, Archie, is what you will find out tomorrow." By 10:30 the next morning, I'd had 2 cups of coffee, a flirtation with Lily Rowan over the phone that was going somewhere until it wasn't, and a cold briefing from Wolfe that boiled down to, "Get out there, poke around, and don't. Get killed." Typical. Miranda Vale had given us 3 names before leaving. The senior staff at Tableau, her kingdom of culinary excellence. She'd insisted they all had access to the kitchen spice rack, and each had history with Marcel Darnay, some of it professional, some personal, and all of it ripe for secrets. Wolfe wanted a dossier on each, not from Google, but from people's faces, voices, and the kind of slips they don't notice when they talk too fast. That's where I come in. The charm, the bait, the guy with the good shoes and the bad questions. Claude Fenwick, executive partner, finance and strategy. My first stop was a sleek office above the restaurant. Everything smelled of old money and wood polish. Fenwick came from the midlife crisis in a yacht club school of fashion, navy blazer, coral pocket square, and a haircut that said he didn't need to impress you, but would still sue you if you parked in his spot. He looked me over with the practiced contempt of a man who was used to turning down investments from people named Todd. "Mr. Goodwin, was it? You're with Mr. Wolfe. I assumed this was about the recipe nonsense, Miranda's paranoia." "Let's call it caution," I said, settling in across from him. "You worked with Marcel Darnay?" He gave a thin smile. I bankrolled Marcel Darnay, back when she was building a culinary empire out of tomato foam and disdain. She was brilliant, terrifying, and allergic to compromise. I admired her immensely, also avoided her like fire. And Miranda. Miranda's different, practical, marketable, doesn't throw sauté pans at interns. Though lately, he trailed off. I waited. She's been distracted, jumpy, ever since she got that letter. I told her to ignore it. Marcel's dead. And if she's not, then she's insane. In which case, even more reason to ignore her. And the missing spice. He waved a hand. Some kitchen melodrama. She probably misplaced it. I thought you weren't in the kitchen. I'm not. But I understand the value of theater. Chefs love to invent ghosts to justify mediocre reviews. He had nothing else to offer, unless I wanted a brochure on venture capital. I didn't. 2. Anika Torres, pastry chef, former protégé of Marcel, found Anika in the bowels of Tableau, where the air was heavy with sugar, heat, and the faint sense of ambition being burned down for the third time. She was small, intense, and wielded a piping bag like a scalpel. I had to wait until she finished lacing a cake with something that looked like spun gold before she acknowledged me. "You're with Wolfe?" she asked without looking up. "Yes, ma'am. I'd offer a card, but it's probably got powdered sugar on it." She gave a faint smile. "Miranda sent you. Or Wolfe did. Doesn't matter. I figured someone would come poking around." "Because of the spice jar? Because of the message?" "The recipe." She wiped her hands, removed her apron, and sat on a stool opposite me. "I saw Marcel write that recipe. The original. It's real. It's her." I kept my face neutral. "You saw her write it?" "I was her apprentice. I know her hand like a priest knows his Bible. She left that recipe behind when she disappeared. I saw Miranda take it." "Take it?" She said she'd keep it safe. Said it was Marcel's final creation. But I think she made copies, or maybe she lost it. I don't know, I just know it's not new. That was interesting. I made a note. Who else knew about it? No one. Marcel didn't trust easily. But maybe Claude. He was always sniffing around the intellectual property. Wanted to franchise her sources. And Bastien Gray? She hesitated. Bastien was loyal, but not to Miranda. He resented being passed over when she was promoted. If he got that recipe, he'd sell it in a heartbeat. Call it an homage. He thinks branding is more important than truth. I nodded. What about Marcel? You think she's alive? No, Anika said. But I think someone wants her ghost to haunt Miranda, and they're doing a good job. You're Bastien Gray. Sous chef and public liaison Gray wasn't in the kitchen when I returned, but I caught him in the back garden rehearsing lines into a headset. His coat was pressed, his shoes were polished, and his smile clicked into place like a well-practiced pose. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, spotting me. "Twice in 24 hours? You'll ruin my reputation." "Hard thing to ruin when you don't." "Have one," I said. "Mind if I ask a few more questions?" He didn't. In fact, he welcomed them like he was auditioning for a cooking show about suspects. "Miranda's convinced this is some kind of psychological warfare," I said. "You agree?" "I think Miranda has demons," Gray said smoothly. "All chefs do, especially those trained by Marcel. That woman taught through fear." "But you admired her." "I admired her influence. She could shatter a man with a glance and make him thank her for the honor." "And the recipe?" He gave a coy smile. "I've seen it before, years ago. Marcel showed it to me in confidence. I was young, eager. She called it her legacy sauce, said the world wasn't ready." "And now?" Gray shrugged. "Maybe the world's grown up." He leaned in slightly. "Between us, I think Miranda wants to believe Marcel's alive. She wants to be haunted. It gives her an excuse for the pressure, for the failures. If you ask me, she planted the recipe herself." "That's a strong accusation." "It's a logical one. Who else would benefit from a story like this, from a mystery, attention, sympathy, fear, all good for business? I thanked him and left before he could offer a soundbite. By the time I got back to the brownstone, the air inside smelled of saffron and silent judgment. Wolfe was at his desk, reading a dictionary like it had offended him personally. I handed him my notes along with my impressions. He listened, occasionally grunting, but didn't speak until I finished. "Miranda is frightened," he said, "but not just by the letter, by the people around her. She doesn't trust any of them, and she's right not to. Annika says Miranda took the original recipe years ago, that she's the only one who had it. Yes, which raises an immediate question. What's that? Why give it to us now?" I frowned. To prove someone else had it? Perhaps. Or to distract us from something else she knows. He tapped a finger on the jar which still sat untouched in the office safe. Claude wants ownership. Bastien wants fame. Annika wants vindication. And Miranda, she wants Marcel back. Wolfe nodded. Or she wants her gone. For good. This time. The next morning, Wolfe handed me a to-do list that read like a grocery order for suspicion. If the case hadn't started in a kitchen, I might have laughed. Instead, I took the assignments like a good soldier and headed out with my shoes shined, my notebook loaded, and my curiosity armed. At the top of Wolfe's list, find out if Marcel Darnay had really died, or if, like certain sources, she'd simply gone into cold storage. First stop, the City Registrar's Office, Death Records Division, Lower Manhattan, is full of characters, most of them with badges, grudges, or bagels. The clerk I met had 2 out of 3 and a coffee stain that looked like Alaska. She flipped through her screen with the urgency of molasses. "Darnay, Marcel," she murmured. "Ah. Yep. Death certificate filed 5 years ago. April 6th, cause of death, cardiac arrest. Signed by a Dr. Jerome Lasker." "Cremation?" I asked. "Cremated the following day at Belmont Mortuary. Authorized by the next of kin. Name listed, Miranda Vale." I blinked. "Miranda." She tapped the screen. "That's what it says. No typo. Could I get a copy of the death certificate?" "Not unless you're family or law enforcement." I smiled. "How about a private detective?" She didn't even look up. "Only if you marry her posthumously." No dice, but I had enough. Miranda hadn't just been Marcel's protégée. She'd been in charge of her remains. If that wasn't closeness, I didn't know what was. Second stop, Belmont Mortuary, Queens. I don't like mortuaries. Nothing personal, they just smell like polished silence and permanent decisions. The guy behind the counter wore an expression like he'd never seen a sunrise and didn't want to. "We handle many cremations," he said, voice like embalming fluid. "Marcel Darnay, yes. 5 years ago. Small service. No ceremony." "Was the body identified?" I asked. He nodded. "Standard procedure. Signed by the authorizing party, Ms. Vale. She confirmed identity. Ashes were not claimed. We scattered them as per agreement. Who delivered the body? Private transport. No name given. Paid in cash. That wasn't unusual. Can I see a photo of the deceased?" He blinked. "That's not common, but not illegal." He hesitated. Then, with the weary sigh of a man unused to pushback, he left for the back room and returned with a digital file. It showed a woman, early 50s, pale and waxen. It could have been Marcel. It also could have been any tired French woman with sharp cheekbones and a bad week. I left with one thought repeating in my head. Wolfe was right. Sentiment and secrecy were making nonsense. Because if Miranda had cremated someone, but not Marcel, then the big question was, who had she burned? Third stop, a bistro in Soho run by one. Jean-Claude Lestrange. Lestrange had cooked beside Marcel in Provence before her migration to the States. He also had a chin like a shovel and a mustache that seemed self-aware. His restaurant, Le Raison, smelled of garlic, money, and midlife reinvention. I adored her, he said when I mentioned Marcel's name. She was impossible, and she changed everything. You kept in touch? Non. She vanished. Poof. Like a souffle in a draft. Did she say anything before she left? He leaned in. She said she had something unfinished, a source, a philosophy. She said the world wasn't ready for it yet. I showed him the recipe Wolfe had copied. His eyes widened. She sent this? No. Someone else. He read it line by line, mouthing, "The ingredients. It's real. This was hers. Do you think she's alive?" He shrugged. No. But I think someone wanted her remembered, and not kindly. That was two people now who said the recipe was authentic, but neither seemed sure Marcel was gone, or at least not sure enough to stop talking about her in the present tense. Fourth stop, the private apartment of Anika. Torres Anika had given me a quick call-first rule, which I ignored because rules are flexible when the truth's on the line. She opened the door in an apron and oven mitts, her eyes squinting from steam. Again? Just a couple questions, I said. Did you know Miranda authorized the cremation? She blinked. What? 5 years ago, listed as next of kin. That's impossible. Marcel didn't have family, but she hated formality. She would have never let anyone claim her remains without clear consent. So why would Miranda do it? I don't know. Her hand gripped the oven mitt like it owed her money. She never told me that. She also never mentioned that the original recipe wasn't destroyed. That hit home. Her jaw tightened. I asked her once. She said Marcel made her promise to never recreate it, that it belonged to history. Except now it's history with a stamp on it and a marketing plan. She looked away. She's lying to someone. I just don't know if it's you or herself. Fifth stop, a side street in Tribeca, Bastien Gray's apartment. I caught Bastien walking his dog, a Pomeranian named Hugo, with more attitude than fur. He looked surprised to see me. Not shocked, just annoyed, like I'd messed with his schedule. Back again. I'm like indigestion, I said. Persistent and not always polite. We walked a few paces, while Hugo yapped at shadows. You said you'd seen that recipe before. Marcel showed it to you? Yes. But Anika said only she and Miranda had ever seen it. He smirked. That's Anika for you, always rewriting history to be its sole heir. So she's lying? I didn't say that. I'm just saying Marcel liked to test people. She showed each of us different pieces, like a puzzle. She said the full recipe wasn't just about ingredients. It was about understanding why. Why what? Why flavor matters. Why we chase legacy. Why chefs go mad chasing perfection. It was poetic, if you like that sort of thing. But Bastien was good with phrases and vague with facts. I didn't trust him, but I believed him. In the way you believe a magician pulled off a trick. You just don't know what they slipped up their sleeve to do it. Back at the brownstone, I unloaded everything. Onto Wolfe's desk. He listened, brows arched, fingers steepled, while I relayed the pieces of a puzzle that wasn't ready to be solved. So, I concluded, either Miranda cremated someone else entirely, or she used a dead woman's name to bury her secrets. Either way, that recipe's real. And it didn't walk in here by accident. Wolfe didn't speak for a while. Then he rose, walked to the safe, and withdrew the spice jar. He placed it carefully on the desk next to the copied recipe. The game, he said, is not about whether Marcel is alive. It is about who wants her ghost to speak, and who is afraid of what it might say. Then, almost to himself, he added, there is a trespass. Something has been violated. Besides your office airspace? I asked. He gave me a glance. Find out who had access to Miranda's apartment in the last 10 days, and tell Saul to dig deeper. We are being watched. I've always said there's a special kind of silence in Wolfe's office, not the everyday quiet of a room without chatter, but the kind that feels intentional, like the furniture's listening, like the Walls have agreed not to creak while Wolfe thinks. That was the silence filling the room the next morning when I came in. Coffee in one hand and a thin manila envelope in the other. Saul had come through. I handed it over without a word. Wolfe, seated behind his desk in his mustard-colored robe, with the buttons straining at their loops, didn't thank me. Gratitude from Wolfe usually came in the form of not being insulted. He slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener and began leafing through the contents. Copies of building entry logs, a few grainy surveillance stills, and an itemized report of Miranda Vale's building maintenance over the last month. "What am I looking for, Archie?" he asked without glancing up. "Depends. You looking for facts or fingerprints?" He grunted, meaning both. 3 days before she came to us, I said. Her apartment building had an unscheduled power test, routine according to the report. But get this, maintenance never filed for it with the city utilities. No outage was recorded on the grid. Lights went out for exactly 14 minutes, then came back on. And during that 14 minutes, someone used the back service, elevator to reach her floor. The feed cut out, but Saul matched timestamps. There's a blur on the camera, might be a coat, definitely not maintenance. Wolfe set the papers down. So someone entered Miranda's apartment, likely to place the recipe or remove something. Else, or both. Wolfe's gaze landed on the safe. We shall assume that the spice jar, the recipe, and the delivery were staged, and that Miranda was meant to panic. She did. Right into our office. Wolfe gave the faintest nod of satisfaction. He enjoys being the center of someone else's plan, as long as he can unravel it first. That afternoon, I paid another visit to Tableau, this time with a purpose beyond conversation. Miranda had agreed to meet me in her test kitchen. It was a room of immaculate stainless steel, copper pans, and scents that could make a cynic weep. She was pale but composed, like someone holding herself together with tape and caffeine. "I know what you're going to say," she said before I could speak. "So you think I planted the recipe? I think someone wants us to think you did." She looked away. "Then they're succeeding." I took out the printed list of building activity and placed it on her cutting board. 3 days before you came to us, someone entered your apartment during a blackout. We think that's when they left the recipe." She didn't flinch. "You think it was someone here. I think someone who knows your schedule, your habits, and your past. That narrows it to this building, and probably to this floor." She stared down at the list. "Then it's Bastien, or Claude, or Annika," I offered. "No, not Annika. You trust her?" "I owe her. That's different. Annika could hate me and still protect me." That was a good line, but not necessarily a convincing one. She rubbed her temples like she was trying to press the memory back in. "When Marcel died," she said, "I was there. She didn't want a funeral. She made me promise. To authorize the cremation under your name?" "Yes, she didn't want people to claim her legacy. She said," her voice caught, "she said people love a corpse more than a challenge. She wanted to vanish, leave only her work." "And yet here it is," I said, tapping the recipe, "which means someone's decided to make her into a product or a weapon. And who would benefit from that?" She looked up at me. "Everyone, or no one, depending on what comes next." I left her to her kitchen and headed for the wine cellar. Not ours, Tableau's. It had come up in Saul's report that the keycard access system had been remotely tampered with 2 nights ago. A 2-minute unlock cycle, logged but never flagged. Apparently, people trusted the wine more than their staff. The cellar was empty, chilled, and lined with racks tall enough to lose someone in. I made a slow walk through the rows, my steps echoing on the concrete floor, until I noticed something odd. A bottle had been replaced out of sequence. Chateau, Margaux 1995, shoved between a row of California Pinots like a French diplomat in a Texas bar. The dust pattern was off. The label too clean. I pulled it. It didn't open. It clicked. Behind it, the wine rack panel swung in about 1/2 inch. Now I've seen hidden compartments before. Wolfe has one in his bookshelf for his rare books and rarer grudges, but this one wasn't hiding wine. Inside, someone had stashed a thin metal box, sealed with tape and smelling faintly of cloves and ash. I didn't open it there. I didn't need to. I knew Wolfe would want it sealed, photographed and bagged before a fingerprint so much as breathed on it. I slid the panel shut and left, my jacket feeling heavier on the walk out. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had just finished his second beer and was attempting to ignore the sound of Fritz in the kitchen, murdering a sauce for the sake of innovation. I set the box on the desk and gave him the full breakdown. He didn't touch it. "Have Saul pick it up," he said. "Have it dusted and opened under observation. We don't need to know what's in it yet. We need to know who wanted it hidden." "You're thinking spice?" "I'm thinking evidence," he leaned back, folding his hands. "Someone is building a resurrection, not of Marcel, but of her legend. The recipe was the spark. The spice jar was the incense. And this," he gestured toward the box, "may be the bones." That was a grim metaphor, even for him. "And the point?" I asked. "To unseat Miranda, to replace her with a curated memory of Marcel, or a facsimile thereof, a brand, precisely." Wolfe stood, an unusual move, and walked to the globe by the windows. He spun it once, slowly, and let it come to a stop on France. "She made enemies when she lived," he said. "Now, she makes puppets in death." That night, someone tried to break into the brownstone. It wasn't dramatic, no shattered glass or alarms, just a slight scratch on the back door lock, noticed by Fritz when he went to take out the garbage. It hadn't opened. Nothing was taken, but Wolfe was livid. "Someone is growing desperate," he said after inspecting the lock. "They want the spice, or the recipe, or the box, or you." "Hardly. I am the fire they lit to draw attention. Now I burn." He turned, eyes sharp. "The pressure is mounting. They will come again, but next time it will not be a lock they test." "What then?" He turned back to his desk, sat and lifted the phone. "Now, Archie," he said, "we position ourselves. The next move is ours." It wasn't the first time someone had tried to sneak past the sanctity of Nero Wolfe's brownstone, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But unlike the usual amateur hour break-ins, half-hearted junkies, jilted lovers, the occasional desperate chef, this one was surgical. No mess, no prints, just a professional's hesitation at the last second, probably triggered by the thick, unseen weight of Wolfe's disapproval that hangs in the air like cigar smoke. At Wolfe's order, I had the locks changed, the hinges greased, and a new alarm system installed. Quiet, wireless, and sensitive enough to detect a moth trying to unionize in the pantry. By mid-morning, Saul Panzer had returned with results from the metal box we'd recovered from Tableau's hidden cellar compartment. Wolfe hadn't opened it, not out of paranoia, but strategy. You don't cut into the magician's hat before you're sure it's hiding a rabbit, and not a rattlesnake. Saul placed the box on Wolfe's desk like it was a relic from a bygone war, and in a way, it was. "Wiped clean," Saul said. "No. Prints. Sealed with lab tape. Contents were intact." He pulled a slim envelope from his inside pocket and handed it to me. I opened it and scanned the inventory. A folded copy of Marcel Darnay's last known handwritten recipe, identical to the one Miranda received, a burned fragment of parchment with her initials partially legible, a half-used glass vial labeled in faded ink, noir du sang photo, grainy and aged, of Marcel standing beside a much younger Miranda, both in aprons, both smiling like it hurt. I read the label aloud. Noir du sang. Blood nut? Wolfe took the list and gave it a thin glance. A culinary myth. Rumored to be a spice blend used in the 18th century in Corsican cuisine. Rare. Illegal in some countries. Not for toxicity, but for animal origin. Black market seasoning, I said. Exotic. More than that. Symbolic. It was said, to deepen flavors by bringing out what the tongue cannot name. Marcel was obsessed with it in her letters. She believed taste carried memory, and memory was a weapon. Romantic notion, or lunatic. Both. That is how chefs become icons. He tapped the photograph with one finger. This was meant to be found. The placement, the timing, a shrine disguised as a secret. But it lacks one essential trait. What's that? Sincerity. No true devotee hides their altar in a wine rack. Later that day I received a call from Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Usually when Lon calls, he wants gossip. This time he had a tip, and the tone of a man who wasn't sure whether to whisper or shout. "Archie," he said, "someone's feeding a story to the food press." "Oh?" That Marcel Darnay left behind a lost manuscript, a culinary memoir, recipes, reflections, unfinished secrets. There's buzz that a publisher has it, or that Tableau's about to unveil it in a special dinner series. I felt a chill run up my neck. That's awfully specific for a dead woman. Exactly, and it's coming from a burner account. Email address uses a French proverb, "La sauce est plus que la viande." The sauce is more important than the meat, a Marcel original. Thought you'd say that. Thanks, Lon. Keep your ears open. If anyone offers you a reservation at Tableau, decline politely and disinfect your inbox. He chuckled. You got it. I relayed the call to Wolfe. He took the news as if I'd told him the sky was turning chartreuse. Mild interest. No emotion. But I've known the man too long. His fingers drummed once on the desk. That was agitation, for Wolfe practically a brawl. This is escalation, he said. Someone is preparing to monetize the myth, which makes Miranda either an accomplice or a liability. He nodded. Call her. Tell her we'll be sending a visitor. A visitor? Mr. Panzer. I want him inside Tableau tonight. Saul. Went in under the guise of a spice vendor. That's one of the many things I admire about the man. He can wear any face and convince a nun she needs a new habit. Wolfe gave him a list of subtle objectives. Note movement patterns in the kitchen. Access points. Who lingered too long near the storage rooms, who took calls in the alley. The rest of us stayed home as instructed. Wolfe had me reorganize the caseboard, which is basically a cork wall of conjectures, with enough strings and push pins to qualify as modern art. By midnight, we had it arranged into 4 distinct groupings. Motive, Miranda. Fear, guilt, protection of Marcel's image, Claude. Profit, control of brand Bastien. Resentment, ambition, media exposure. Annika, loyalty, legacy. Personal truth. Means all had access to kitchen and wine cellar. All had motive to plant or misplace the recipe. Only Miranda had legal authority over Marcel's estate, opportunity Bastien present during all critical incidents, Claude's office, not on. Camera Annika closest to Miranda emotionally. Easiest access, intangibles recipe matches Marcel's handspice origin unknown, but potent symbolism box content staged. Deliberate arrangement at 2:18 a.m. The phone rang. Saul's voice was low, calm, efficient. There was a meeting. Late, back patio. Miranda, Bastien and Claude. What kind of meeting? Hostile. Claude accused Miranda of lying about the manuscript. Bastien mentioned having the originals. Miranda denied everything. She sounded scared. She sounded angry. She said Marcel wouldn't have wanted this. Then she said something about burning everything if she had to. Wolfe, who was listening on the speaker, spoke up. She won't burn it. Not yet. Why? I asked. Because she doesn't know who's framing her. And she needs to see. The game to know which piece she is. He leaned forward. Tell Mr. Panzer to stay in position. At dawn, Wolfe did something extraordinary. He left his chair. Not far, just to the office window where the rising sun was slicing gold across the curtains. He stood there a moment, wrapped in shadow and silk, like an old Roman general surveying a battlefield of whispers. Then he spoke. This is not about food. Not truly. No. No. It is about authorship. about who gets to write the last line of a great woman's story. And whoever that is wants to erase the footnotes. He nodded. They want Marcel alive only long enough to sell her, then buried for good. There was a knock at the door. Fritz. He had the morning mail in one hand and something else, an envelope, marked with Wolfe's name and sealed in crimson wax. Fritz frowned. It was slid under the garden gate. No return address. Wolfe broke the seal with his thumb. Inside was a single card, thick, ivory. No message, no signature, just 3 words written in Marcel Darnay's sharp, unmistakable hand. You are wrong. Nero Wolfe read the card 3 times before he spoke, I counted. Then he folded it with surgical precision and laid it flat on his blotter like a dangerous relic from an extinct cult. I watched from my chair, waiting for some kind of volcanic reaction, a growl, a tirade, even a scoff. Instead, he pressed the bridge of his nose between thumb and forefinger, like he was pinching away the absurdity of the entire human race. Archie, he said at last, prepare for war. That wasn't hyperbole. When Wolfe says war, he means the kind fought with words like scalpels, movements like chess pieces, and facts sharp enough to draw blood. He had no interest in vengeance, but he had immense interest in being told he was wrong, especially by someone who may or may not be dead. We began with a few immediate moves. First, Saul was instructed to dig deeper into Claude Fenwick's financial records. Not his corporate dealings, Wolfe clarified, his personal investments. Look for an influx of capital since Miranda's appointment, especially anything labeled consulting, branding, or transition planning. Second, I was sent to follow Bastien Gray, not interview, not question, just follow. Wolfe suspected Bastien was the lever someone else was pulling, the kind of man who'd sell a ghost for a headline, as long as he didn't have to pay for. The exorcism. Third, Wolfe sent a message to Miranda Vale. Be here at 6 o'clock tonight. Do not bring anyone, do not be late. He had no intention of accusing her, not yet, but he wanted to see what fear looked like when it arrived without an audience. I caught up with Bastien around 11. He was coming out of a midtown cafe with a man I didn't recognize. Late 50s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of beige overcoat that screams, I'm trying to disappear. They spoke briefly, hands in pockets, then parted ways without so much as a handshake. Bastien turned down a side street. I tailed him discreetly. He stopped at a narrow brownstone with frosted windows and a discreet brass plate. Benedict and Rose Literary Agency. Huh. He went inside and stayed for exactly 42 minutes. When he emerged, he looked smug, which was impressive because he always looked smug, but this time it had seasoning. I waited until he was gone, then doubled back and made a note of the address. Wolfe would know what to do with it. Back at the brownstone, Fritz was finishing up his afternoon prep. I sniffed something with paprika, saffron, and a little too much tension in the air. Wolfe was in the office leaning forward, always a sign that he was assembling something. Delicate and sharp, I relayed the details of Bastien's meeting and the address. Literary agent, I said. Wolfe, I think he's trying to sell a book. He is, Wolfe said, but not his. Not entirely, that is the trap. Whose manuscript is it? Miranda's. Or a reconstruction of Marcel's notes passed through Miranda's hand. You think he stole it? No, I think Miranda gave it to him once. Trusted him. Perhaps during a moment of grief or ego. And now he holds it hostage. That tract. But Wolfe wasn't done. Claude wants control of Tableau. Annika wants truth. Bastien wants the spotlight. Only Miranda wants silence, which makes her the only one who understands the weight of what's been stirred. At precisely 6 o'clock, Miranda arrived. She wore the same grey coat as the first day, but her posture had changed. Less defiant, more tired, like someone. Halfway through an uphill climb they never agreed to take. Wolfe gestured for her to sit. She did. I took my usual place. "Miss Vale," Wolfe began, "you've been played." She exhaled softly but didn't argue. "They took Marcel from you in pieces. First the recipe, then the myth, and now the manuscript, all under the guise of resurrection. But this isn't revival, it's repackaging." "I know," she said. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You do?" She reached into her handbag and produced a slim folder. Inside were 2 documents, a scanned letter from Marcel Darnay, dated 6 months before her death, and a handwritten preface to a culinary memoir titled The Taste of Absence. She gave me these, Miranda said. "She told me to destroy them. I didn't." "Why?" "I couldn't. It was all I had left. But I didn't want anyone else to have them either. Yet Bastien does." She looked down. "He found them, snooped, photographed everything before I realized, said it was for safekeeping. I believed him." Wolfe's voice was quiet but cold. "You believed the one man Marcel never trusted." "I was alone," Miranda snapped. "You don't know what it was like. Everyone wanted something. Claude wanted to gut the restaurant and sell the name. Annika wanted me to be Marcel. Bastien just wanted to be important." "And you?" "I wanted to be left alone, but Marcel wouldn't let me do that even in death." Wolfe nodded once. "You didn't write that card?" "No." "Then someone wants you to believe she's alive." Miranda stared at the floor. "And if she is?" "She is not," Wolfe said flatly. "You cremated her, unless you doubt your own memory." She didn't answer. Which was an answer. After she left, Wolfe called Saul again, instructed him to make an unannounced visit to Benedict and Rose, posing as a publisher with a sudden interest in culinary memoirs, not to buy, just to ask whether the agency had seen anything promising lately, especially anything posthumous. By 9 that evening, we had our answer. The agency had received a manuscript 3 weeks earlier, anonymous, digitized, titled The Taste of Absence, claimed to be Marcel Darnay's final work. Publicist notes included phrases like "ghost written with reverence" and "culinary resurrection." The deal was being quietly shopped to editors at Bon Appetit and The Times. "Target release date?" I asked. "Autumn," Saul said. "Just in time for the anniversary of her death." I didn't say it out loud, but I didn't need to. Wolfe's lips had tightened. Not in frustration, he'd already moved past that, but in focus. "They are building a launch," Wolfe said. "The recipe, the spice, the box, the letter, they are pieces of a campaign, drip-fed, theatrical, crafted to stir doubt and reverence. They are trying to sell belief, but belief requires one final performance." "The illusion of resurrection," I said. He nodded. "They want Marcel to appear. Alive or rediscovered. A filmed interview, a journal, a confession. Fabricated, of course, but evocative enough to make people believe she orchestrated it all, that she passed the torch to Bastien and Miranda. They need her to disappear, quietly, gracefully, with just enough mystery to keep the myth alive." I looked at the card again. "You are wrong. They're setting her up as the keeper of a lie." Wolfe's voice turned heavy. "And unless I intervene, she will believe it." At 10:30 that night, we made the call. Wolfe summoned all 4 of them, Miranda, Bastien, Claude, and Annika, to the brownstone. He told them to arrive the next evening at 7. No excuses, no substitutions. Wolfe didn't say why, he never does, but I knew. This was the setup, the staging ground, the theatre, the room where Wolfe would, as always, sit in his chair, say nothing for the first 5 minutes, then tear down a scheme so cleanly it would leave the guilty feeling grateful just to be named. I closed the office doors behind me, turned out the lights, and poured myself a drink. Because tomorrow someone's carefully plated lie was going to get carved up. At exactly 7 o'clock the knock came. That alone told me we had a full house of suspects, all punctual, all preloaded with whatever flavor of guilt, indignation, or smug. Detachment they thought would protect them from what Nero Wolfe was about to serve. I opened the door and let them in, one by one. Miranda Vale, pale but steady, wearing no makeup and no patience. Claude Fenwick, all teeth and cologne, his cufflinks catching the light like threats. Annika Torres, guarded and silent, like a woman already bracing for betrayal. And finally, Bastian Gray, looking like he was about to give a press conference, not sit through a murderless murder trial. Wolfe didn't rise to greet them. He never does. He merely gestured with one hand to the chairs arranged in a semicircle before his desk, a formation he preferred for these kinds of verbal executions. I took my seat to his right. Notebook open, pen ready, gun loaded, not literally but in spirit. Once they were seated, Wolfe began, calmly, coldly. You are here because one of you has committed a crime, not one punishable by statute, perhaps, but a crime nonetheless. A trespass against memory, against truth. Claude gave a theatrical sigh. Mr. Wolfe, if this is about the recipe— It is not, Wolfe cut in, voice quiet but absolute. It is about the corpse you have wrapped in silk and handed to the world as a gift. Claude opened his mouth again, but Wolfe silenced, him with a glance. You have all been playing a role, some knowingly, others less so, but the purpose has been the same, to reconstruct Marcel Darnay into a marketable fiction. Wolfe turned his gaze toward Bastian. You, Mr. Gray, are the linchpin, the performance artist, the voice behind the mask. Bastian smiled, just slightly. I don't know what you mean. You do. The manuscript sent to Benedict and Rose, digitally edited, annotated in your phrasing, and the proposal written with such reverent duplicity, ghost-written with Marcel's spirit, guiding every word. Do you deny it? I deny nothing, Bastian said smoothly. But I didn't. Forge anything, the work is real, the recipes are hers, the story is yours, Wolfe said. You took fragments Miranda kept, notes Marcel had asked to be destroyed. You copied them, then constructed a mythology, a resurrection narrative, carefully timed with the 5th anniversary of her death. Annika stirred, arms folded. I knew he was up to something. Indeed, Wolfe said. But you, Miss Torres, are not entirely innocent either. You discovered the missing spice jar in Miranda's kitchen 3 days before she came to me. You said nothing. Annika flushed. I didn't think it mattered. It always matters, Wolfe said. And Claude, Mr. Fenwick, you supplied the funds for this operation. You signed off on the culinary resurrection marketing campaign drafted by Bastian. Claude chuckled. Of course I did. It was brilliant. If Miranda wouldn't give us the rights to Marcel's archive, we'd take them, through Bastian, through the press, through the food. You can't copyright memory. Wolfe narrowed his eyes. Ah, the most honest thing you've said, and the most damning. I watched Miranda closely. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. She was staring down at her hands in her lap. And Miranda, Wolfe said, softer now, you have enabled them. Not by malice, by silence. You should have burned the letters. But you kept them. You let grief ferment into fear. And now the concoction has turned toxic. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse. I didn't think anyone would go this far. No one ever does, Wolfe replied, until it is done. There was a silence, a heavy one. Then Bastian leaned forward. All right, he said. Fine, yes, I found the letters. I saw the potential. Marcel was brilliant, but she was gone. What was left? A few angry protégés and a kitchen no one could live up to. I wanted to honor her. You wanted to own her, Wolfe corrected, by making her speak in your voice, a ventriloquist act disguised as tribute. Bastian flushed. The smile cracked. You made a mistake, he said. You called this meeting too early. The public. There's already primed. The buzz is out, the release is coming. But you made a bigger one, Wolfe said. You targeted Miranda first. You tried to frighten her, gaslight her, make her believe Marcel had returned, and when that didn't work, you planned to erase her entirely. Claude raised his eyebrows. We never threatened her. Not in the legal sense, Wolfe said, but you broke into her apartment, planted the letter, the recipe, the spice jar. You manipulated her trust, the emotional equivalent of assault. Annika turned toward Claude. You did that? You went into her home? Claude rolled his eyes. It was Bastien's idea. Symbolism, he said. Drama. And the message slipped under our gate yesterday, I added. Marcel's handwriting warning Wolfe he was wrong? Who wrote it? Bastien didn't answer. Wolfe supplied it. Annika. She blinked. Me? You forged her handwriting for the restaurant's 5th anniversary commemorative menu last year. Fritz showed me a copy. The stylistic match is exact. You did it to help Bastien add flavor. You did it again to convince Wolfe Marcel was alive. Annika stared at Bastien. You said it was just a flourish. You said... I said what I needed to, Bastien snapped. Because none of... You were doing anything. We were fading into irrelevance. Miranda stood. She gave me everything, she said, voice shaking. And you turned her into a sideshow. You hollowed her out and filled her with your ego. Bastien stood too. She gave you nothing but pressure. She made you her mirror and then cracked it. I gave you a legacy. You gave yourself a billboard, she hissed. Enough, Wolfe said. They all looked at him. I have already forwarded my findings to a legal contact. No crimes will be pursued, no arrests. But the literary agent has been warned. The manuscript will not go to print. If it does, there will be lawsuits for intellectual theft. And if any mention of Marcel Darnay appears in press tied to Tableau, there will be retractions. You will retract them. Or I will. Claude scowled. You think you can control the narrative? I don't need to, Wolfe said. I only need to spoil it. After they left, Wolfe sat back in his chair, eyes closed. I poured 2 fingers of whiskey and left it on the edge of his desk. She won't rebuild, I said after a minute. Miranda? Not the kitchen. Not herself. Too much burned down. She will, Wolfe said, in silence, as Marcel intended. He opened his eyes. Tell Saul to watch the press for 30 days. I want to know who tries to resurrect her next. I nodded. And Archie, he added, lifting the glass, never underestimate the power of a recipe. It is a language for those too wounded to speak plainly. I gave him a look. Was that philosophical insight or indigestion? He took a sip. Both. The day after the confrontation, the brownstone was quiet in a way that only came after Wolfe had dismantled a scheme. That kind of silence isn't restful. It's surgical, like the hum of disinfected instruments after a successful operation. The wound was closed, but the healing hadn't started. Wolfe hadn't left his chair all morning, and I hadn't poked the bear. Instead, I handled calls, returned Fritz's half-melted attempt at a Tuscan lemon tart back to culinary purgatory, and watched the newsroom gossip columns for tremors. There weren't any. Lon Cohen had kept his word. Not a single line about Marcel Darnay or her posthumous comeback appeared in print. The leak had stopped as quickly as it had begun. No interviews, no op-eds, no cookbook tributes. The silence was loud. At 11:17 a.m., the doorbell rang. Opened it to find Miranda Vale. She was alone. No coat this time, no makeup, and no trace of the wary calm she'd worn on her first visit. She looked like a woman emptied out, drained but finally still. I won't stay long, she said. I led her to the office. Wolfe didn't stand, but he did look up. For him, that was a standing ovation. I wanted to say thank you, she said, voice steady. Wolfe inclined his head. What will you do now? She smiled faintly. I'm going away for a while. There's a culinary retreat in the Loire Valley. No press, no plating. Just produce and quiet. I've booked 3 months. Maybe 6. Wolfe made a small sound. That might have passed for approval. You were right about Marcel, Miranda continued. She's gone. And I think that's the first time I've let her go. He said nothing, but she didn't seem to need more. She handed me a small envelope on her way out. For Mr. Wolfe, it's not business. When she was gone, I opened it. Inside was a folded recipe card in Marcel Darnay's hand. It had yellowed with time. The ink was faded. It was a vinaigrette. Nothing fancy, just mustard, oil, vinegar, and a dash of salt. Wolfe took it, turned it over, and read the back. There was a single line written in French. We leave behind what we want others to taste. He closed the card and set it gently on his desk. Later that day, Saul called with the last of the background confirmations. Bastien Gray had formally resigned from Tableau. He claimed creative differences, but we both knew it was about brand salvage. He was already shopping around another concept, a pop-up dining experience themed around forgotten ingredients. Claude. Fenwick was quieter. No lawsuits, no press statements, just a quiet withdrawal from Tableau's day-to-day operations. His investment firm was distancing itself from the restaurant's upcoming fiscal cycle. Annika, according to Saul, had taken over Miranda's duties temporarily. She declined all interviews, no new recipes, just strict preservation of the current menu. It wasn't reinvention. It wasn't innovation. It was respect. Around 6, Fritz laid dinner on the table, quail with wild rice. The wine was subtle, the conversation non-existent. Wolfe had eaten in thoughtful silence, and I let him. He was still chewing something, metaphorically, when we returned to the office and resumed our evening ritual. Him with his beer, me with my notes. You're not going to frame that vinaigrette? I asked. No. Why not? Because it was meant to be used, not displayed. He took a sip of his beer and looked at the office window, where dusk had begun to gather like a velvet curtain. The tragedy is not that Marcel was forgotten, he said. It is that they remembered her wrong. They made her a ghost because they could not stand that she had finished speaking. I nodded. So they gave her one more line. One that served them. He glanced at me. Exactly. A pause. Wolfe. What about Miranda? Did she break the promise, keeping the manuscript? No, he said. She deferred the end. That is not a betrayal. That is grief. So I scratched that into my notebook, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remember it. Around 8, the phone rang. It was Lon Cohen. You're not going to believe this, he said. A rival food columnist just had their house broken into. No kidding. Nothing taken, except a flash drive. One she used to store unpublished articles. Rumor is she was about to run a piece on Marcel's resurrection. Someone's still cleaning up. Looks that way, I relayed. The news. Wolfe didn't blink. The work of cowards, he said. What they couldn't create, they tried to erase. Should we get involved? No. You sure? Yes. And that was that. At 10 that night, Wolfe finally stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out one of his oldest volumes, a culinary encyclopedia he rarely touched unless provoked. He opened it to a section on French sauces, thumbed through until he reached a page marked by a pressed herb leaf, and slid in the recipe card Miranda had given him. Then he shut the book. Is that archival or sentimental? I asked. Neither, he replied. It is order. He returned to his chair, reached for another beer, and added almost to himself, There are those who think taste is ephemeral, that a flavor is gone once swallowed, fools. The tongue may forget, but the mind never does. Every flavor leaves a trace. And the ones built from deceit? He tapped his temple. They rot. Let that settle for a while, then I stood. "You know," I said, "you could probably make a killing ghostwriting cookbooks." Wolfe closed his eyes. Pfui. The next morning was as ordinary as a clock. Wolfe retreated to the orchids. Fritz resumed his war on mediocrity. I filed reports, paid the bills, and called Saul to confirm everything was still quiet on the E. Culinary front. There were no more letters, no more spice jars, no more whispers from the dead, just peace, the kind that always follows intellectual justice, not courtroom justice, not handcuffs or headlines, but the kind that arrives when the right story wins. Miranda sent a postcard 2 weeks later, a market square in the Loire. She was learning to cure duck and rediscover patience. She said the kitchens there didn't speak Marcel's name, but they cooked with her silence. Wolfe pinned it to the board with a thumbtack and said nothing, which, in this case, was more than enough. 3 weeks passed, and with them, the heat of the case settled into the low hum of recollection. There were no headlines, no reprisals, no dramatic denials. Just silence, carefully curated, professionally arranged, like a fine meal plated for a critic who never shows up. Inside the brownstone, normalcy reasserted itself like a returning monarch. Fritz was back to terrorizing local vendors for imperfect produce. Wolfe had resumed his daily routine with the seamless gravity of a planet in orbit. Breakfast at 8, orchids from 9 to 11, beer at 1, and absolute refusal to accept clients before dinner. Even I had returned to my usual duties, mild surveillance, administrative wrangling, and the occasional flirtation with danger disguised as a lunch date. Still, something lingered. Not a case, not a ghost, but an aftertaste. You don't dismantle a myth and walk away without a flavor clinging to your tongue. That morning Wolfe called me into the office. No urgency, just that particular tone that suggested either a philosophical musing or a tactical decision involving the state of our pantry. "Archie," he said, "you recall Marcel's maxim?" I raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "She had a whole menu of them." He tapped his index finger on the armrest. "The sauce is more important than the meat." I nodded. "Yeah, never got around to asking her what she meant." "You did," Wolfe said. "You just never listened." That sounded familiar. "Okay, I'll bite. What did she mean?" He gestured lazily toward the window. "Meat is raw potential, muscle, mass, ingredient. Sauce is interpretation, point of view, the chef's signature, his language. Anyone can serve meat, but only a few can say something worth remembering with a sauce." I leaned back, arms crossed. "So what you're saying is, they tried to rewrite the sauce." "They tried to counterfeit it," he corrected. "They took her bones and wrapped them in the words of strangers. That was the offense, not theft, not even fraud, but forgery of essence." I smiled faintly. "You should write that down. Call it on taste and treachery." He ignored me, which was his way of agreeing. "And Miranda?" I asked. "Did she commit an offense?" "No," Wolfe said. "She hesitated. She withheld. But she did not falsify. She protected the recipe. And when the moment came, she gave it to someone who could recognize it for what it was. Not just ingredients, but grief, guilt, and reverence folded into oil and vinegar." He turned, eyeing the volume on his shelf where the recipe was now quietly entombed. "You see, Archie, we spend our lives seasoning our lives. A dash of memory, a pinch of belief. But when others begin to spice our stories without our consent, they ruin the stew." He gave the smallest smile. "Precisely." That afternoon I received a letter from Saul. Not typed, handwritten. That alone was enough to make me sit up and read it twice. Inside was a short report, one Wolfe had quietly requested without even telling me. Subject: Bastian Gray. After his resignation, Gray had taken a job consulting on a culinary television pilot in LA. It was tentatively titled Legacy Plate. a pseudo-reality series in which chefs resurrected old recipes from dead masters. He was an uncredited co-producer. A pilot had been filmed, but the network declined to pick it up. No viewers, no appetite. Saul closed the note with a line Wolfe would appreciate. Legacy, it turns out, doesn't pair well with artificial flavor. I handed Wolfe the letter. He read it, sighed, and filed it into the case folder. Closure, sealed not with punishment, but with evaporation. Miranda wrote again from France this time. She had taken to the countryside, a rented stone kitchen, a fig orchard, an old Peugeot. That barely ran. She wrote about the peace in simplicity, the joy of a sauce made slowly without witnesses. She said she had made the vinaigrette Wolfe preserved. Said she served it to strangers who never asked where it came from. She signed off with a final line. I no longer need to be Marcel's voice. I've finally learned to hear my own. Wolfe read it. Said nothing, but he left the letter out, on the desk for the rest of the day. That's Wolfe's version of framing a photograph. We didn't speak of Claude again, or Annika, or Bastien. Not out of avoidance, but completion. Their roles were finished. Their names returned to the catalogue of past cases, somewhere between the counterfeit canapé and the paranoid sommelier. But the memory of Marcel lingered in our kitchen like a spice never fully scrubbed from the rack. Fritz, after some prodding, tried a variation of her sauce one evening. Not an exact copy, Wolfe wouldn't have allowed it, but an echo, a respectful nod. Wolfe tasted it, paused, and then, uncharacteristically, stood and walked into the kitchen to thank him. Fritz didn't say anything, but I swear, the next day, he whistled while trimming the leeks. That's about as emotional as it gets in our house. On the final night of March, Wolfe called me in to dictate a letter, one addressed to a small culinary archive in Geneva. He was donating a scan of the vinaigrette card, along with a note of provenance. He signed the letter with a flourish, sealed it in a heavy envelope, and handed it to me with care. Send it yourself, he said. Not by courier. Trust. Issues? No, he replied. Decency. And that, more or less, was that. The ghosts went quiet. The sauces simmered without drama. And Wolfe returned to debating Fritz over the merits of capers in egg salad, like nothing had ever happened. But I remembered. I remembered the look on Miranda's face when she left the office, finally untethered from the woman who made her. I remembered the way Wolfe held that recipe card like it was an artifact. I remembered the spice jar, real or not, carrying the illusion of legacy so heavy it nearly buried its keeper. And I remembered Wolfe's final words that night, delivered, just before bed, while sipping the last of his beer and watching the light fade. Truth, Archie, is like a well-made stock. Clear, honest, and built from bones. I didn't say anything, but the next morning I threw out 3 old spice jars Fritz had been clinging to. One of them was unlabeled, dusty, and smelled faintly of burnt cloves. And just for once, I didn't. Ask what it was, I just let it go. Because sometimes the best thing you can do with a secret ingredient, 'tis stop trying to name it. If you ask Nero Wolfe, a mystery isn't truly solved when the culprit is exposed. It's solved when everyone involved understands what they did, why they did it, and what they've lost. Most people don't get that. They prefer easier resolutions, handcuffs, headlines, denials, but Wolfe wants comprehension, he wants clarity. And as always, he got it. A week after our final office gathering, after the manuscript was pulled, after the agents had scattered, and after Bastien Gray's dreams of culinary infamy had been neatly flambéed, we got one last visit. Not from Miranda, not from Saul, not even from the press. It was Anika Torres. She came to the brownstone alone on a grey Tuesday, carrying a narrow wooden box wrapped in parchment. She looked smaller somehow, or maybe just quieter. I wanted you to have this, she said to Wolfe, placing the box on the desk. He didn't open it. Just regarded it like a sealed confession. "What is it?" I asked. She looked at me, then Wolfe. "Marcel's real legacy." Wolfe arched a brow. "Not recipes," Annika continued. "Not spice, not fame. These are her kitchen journals, unpublished, private. She kept them in the back of her pantry in a locked drawer no one bothered to check. I found them 2 nights ago going through her old boxes. She never mentioned them, not even to Miranda. She meant to keep them private," Wolfe said. "Yes," Annika admitted. "But maybe privacy can become poison too." Wolfe considered that, then opened the box. Inside were 3 notebooks, cloth-bound, soft with wear. The pages were dense, with notes, not just recipes but thoughts, observations, reflections on flavor, life, ego, and fear. One entry caught my eye. Wolfe read it aloud, softly. "What they want is my essence without the cost. They want my mistakes rewritten into elegance. But a recipe without error is a lie. The spice is blood, and the blood is mine. I cannot feed them any more." He closed the journal. Annika sat, then stood again, unsure. "You'll know what to do with them." "I do," Wolfe said. "I shall leave them alone." After she left, I asked if he really meant that. "I do," he replied. "You're not going to read them?" "I already have," he said. "In every dish she ever made, that is enough." And that, I realized, was Wolfe's version of reverence, not possession, not publication, just knowing when something sacred should stay untouched. A few days later, we got word that Miranda had extended her stay in France. No return date, no interview tour, no cookbook. She had enrolled at a local culinary school, not as an instructor but as a student. The letter was short, but the final line said everything. "I'm learning how to cook without ghosts." I read, "Pay it to Wolfe over lunch." He said nothing, but ate his duck with unusual patience. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm. Wolfe read. I loitered. Fritz brooded over asparagus. Occasionally Saul would call with a small case, but there were no more spice jars, no notes in dead handwriting, no operatic schemes cooked in the dark corners of professional envy. One evening, Wolfe asked Fritz to prepare Marcel's vinaigrette. Faithfully, exactly, no modifications. Fritz hesitated, then did it. Wolfe tasted it at dinner. He didn't comment. He just finished it, which, coming from him, was praise. That night, back in the office, I asked him the question that had been waiting in the wings for weeks. "Wolfe, were you ever wrong?" He looked up from his book. "About Marcel? About any of it?" He paused, set the book down. "I was wrong about how far they would go. I underestimated their hunger, not for flavor, but for credit. They didn't want to cook like Marcel. They wanted to be her, or better, be her inheritors without earning the inheritance. And Miranda? She wanted release. She just didn't know how to ask for it." There was a silence. Then Wolfe said very softly, "The most dangerous ingredient in any kitchen, Archie, is memory. It alters everything it touches." That, I think, was the true end of the case. Not when the plot collapsed, or when the manuscript vanished, but when Wolfe admitted that the crime had never been about money or fame. It was about authorship, about the right to own the past. He had defended it, not with force, not with fury, but with logic, precision, understanding, and in doing so, he had written the only version of Marcel Darnay's ending that she would have accepted, one without spectacle, without spin, and without imitation. Just truth. Unseasoned. Served cold. The next morning, I cleaned the safe. Inside was the sealed spice jar. I held it a moment, then carried it downstairs out to the garbage. No one stopped me. Some flavors, I figured, weren't meant to be preserved. Some were better left to fade, like heat on the tongue or grief from the heart. And some were never spice at all, just blood.